95% of them I don't know on Facebook.
Yeah.
So.
No, because of when the Bernie campaign was up, everybody who had a Bernie frame on their photo was adding everybody else who had a Bernie frame on their photo.
Nice.
So we all ended up with like thousands of people we didn't know.
Thousands.
Thousands.
How many do you have?
Like almost 4,000 friends on Facebook now. I
Nice.
cut it down. Like, say, every time somebody said something like super stupid and like out the window, I was like, okay, bye.
Bye. Okay, wait, what's the stupidest?
Like back before even COVID happened, I was like, oh, vaccines, like anti-vaxxers.
Vaccines.
There were a lot of anti-vaxxers.
In the Bernie
like,
community?
Yeah.
No way.
Actually, there were at least a lot of anti-vaxxers in the left.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot on the left because it's like the whole holistic group. But I assume the Bernie group was more cohesive.
No, there were a lot of people. I wish. Nah, dude.
So split. That's actually something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I was talking at your house party to a couple people about this. The problem with the left is the left wants change. And it attracts everyone who wants change. But they're moving in 100 different directions.
It's not as much that as it's even if they agree on policy, they don't necessarily agree on how to achieve it.
Right.
Right. Like take someone like AOC and someone like Nina Turner. Mm-hmm. Right. Like she just ran for. Nina Turner was Bernie's campaign spokesperson. She was before that. She was a state senator in Ohio. She just ran for Congress in Ohio. She unfortunately lost with a pretty small margin to a corporate Democrat. But the different approach between someone like Nina Turner and AOC is that Nina Turner is like, you got to be willing to shoot the hostage, right? Like, if there is a bill, like if, for example, when they were doing the stimulus package and the minimum wage, the $15 minimum wage was in it, and then the $15 minimum wage got taken out, then the progressive should have been like, okay, well, I guess the stimulus bill isn't passing, right? Like, there was one thing we asked for, you didn't put it in there, we're not gonna vote no. So yeah, go fuck yourself. That's what Manchin and Sinema are willing to do. That's what the conservative wing of the Democratic Party is willing to do. It's like, oh, if we don't like it, we're going to vote no. The left isn't willing to do the same. AOC is willing to go along. They need
something to put on the record. Like, the Republicans, they just need to say, oh,
we prevented.
Yeah, we prevented this. Look, this didn't pass. The Democrats need to be able to say, to elect me again, look what I passed. I gave you this amount of money. I did this, and even if they didn't get everything, they got something.
I think with the Republicans, what's interesting is that was... Are we live, by the way, or are we still...
We are live. I think I'll probably end up using this so far. You want to introduce yourself, actually?
Yeah. Adam, Hatefi, I don't even remember where the fuck we met. Like...
Through Ben.
Definitely through Ben. Was it summer? I don't know. I don't remember.
Probably, actually. There was that one summer session where you guys were all corralled in those upperclassmen dorms.
Yeah, that was it. That was it. We were pulling all the pranks. That sounds about right. So yeah, I've known you for a couple of years now. Mm-hmm. I just graduated at UC Davis. While I was at UC Davis, I did a lot of political stuff, and now I'm heading to law school. And we built my friends and I got involved with politics. We built the largest single campus lobbying operation in the country at UC Davis.
Wow.
I don't know if we're going to be that next year because we're out of there.
Right.
But for the time that we were there, that was the case. We got a bill passed through the Assembly the first year that I was there, the California Assembly. We got another bill in this year that's coming back next year. I don't know if anybody's going to be there to get it through, but that's what I've been doing, and
All right. So
laws. What's next?
Let's see. You said you got a bill passed through the Assembly. Another one about there. You want to talk about those?
Yeah, sure. So the first one was kind of weird. We were looking at agriculture. A friend of mine worked for a person who ran for state senate, and he came to me and he was like, "Hey, his name is Luke Epstein," and he came to me and he said, "Hey, we had this thing in the campaign and we couldn't get it through, and it was basically incentivizing better irrigation systems." I was like, we're a bunch of students that has absolutely nothing to do with us. Mm-hmm. I don't have any better ideas though, so let's do it.
Yeah.
The bill passed the Assembly. It died in the Senate, but this year, the governor put $100 million in the program, and the Department of Food and Agriculture is pretty much adopting all the guidelines that we'd written into that bill.
Okay.
So we didn't get the bill through the whole process, but we started the momentum that got the things that we wanted into law, so I'm pretty happy about that. And that's for the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program. California Climate and Agriculture Network picked up where we left off and got that thing through. So I'm pretty happy about that. This year we're working on student housing to make sure that Yeah, essentially we wanted to make it so that lawsuits filed against student housing projects would go through the courts faster because,
Faster.
well, I mean, we can't prevent them, the
Right.
lawsuits, but what happened in Davis and in many other California college communities was that there were programs there were student housing development projects that were approved, and then they just got sued, and they never got through. And Nishi, for example, has still in
Nishi.
Davis. That was 2 years ago. I don't know if
Right.
you remember when we voted on it in 2018.
I remember.
Passed with 60%. We had
It
to.
passed.
Yeah,
I
Nishi
didn't-
2.0 passed with 60% of the vote.
Okay.
Still hasn't started building because it's been embroiled in lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, and each of them takes a year and a half to resolve. And I wanted to fix that. We got together with my staff and we wrote the bill. Assembly member, at first it was going to get introduced in the Senate, ended up being introduced in the Assembly, AB 1277, and that was last year. We couldn't get it through last year, but it's the first year in the session, so we still have another year to get it through.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a bill introduced in an odd number year, you have until the end of the even number year to get it through because the session is 2 years and then there's a re-election.
Oh, okay.
So we have until next year to finish that, and I might even try to do it remotely from freaking Phoenix on
Right,
the phone.
right.
Like, get the bill through. No.
Yeah, you're moving away.
Yeah, I mean everything. You can do remote meetings now.
That's true.
Because of the pandemic, everybody's used to it. So I'm probably going to try to get it through, even though I'm not going to be here and it's not going to impact me in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a good bill, and it should get through, and there is nobody else who's going to work on it. So
Right.
yeah, so that's what that was about.
That's the one you got through the Assembly. You said you're working on a second one as well?
This was the second one.
This
The
is the
first
second
one was the agriculture one.
Oh, right. Okay. So you have both those. Can you talk a little bit about, like, so you said the largest
Yeah.
student run?
We were the only campus, I think, in the country. I'm fairly certain because I checked and I didn't find any other people we were introducing at least one bill. Like we were fully sponsoring one bill per year in our state legislature as a single campus.
Right.
So obviously there are student associations that are, like for example the UC Student Association, which is all the UC campuses together, and that's a different story. They sponsor bills and do stuff all the time. They have a professionally paid staff. The legislative director is Parshan is a friend of mine actually. We work together very closely, but they have a professionally paid staff in Sacramento. They have an office. That's their full-time job. That's what they do. We were just a bunch of students, and as far as I know, and if I'm wrong, oops. But I checked. I looked around, and we were the only campus who were introducing legislation year after year on a consistent basis on this scope.
Okay.
So,
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Did you help set up the organization?
didn't exist before we got there.
Exactly. Talk about so how did the idea come to you guys? How did you guys end up getting the grassroots?
There was a lobby corps a few years ago that didn't really do what we're doing. They mostly advocated on other people's legislation, and that kind of fell apart right before I got there. I joined that office. It was at the time it was called the Office of Advocacy and Student Representation. I got there in 2018, and the name was changed to the External Affairs Vice President, and the position became elected.
Okay.
I was appointed to the position until the election, right, for 1 year, and that was the time frame that we had to build it. So I was the chief of staff for the Office of Advocacy and Student Representation for 1 year, and then when it was made elected, I was there for another year until the next election. And in those 2 years, the office had completely fallen apart. There was no infrastructure there. There was no institutional memory. They hadn't done anything big for quite a few years. The reputation was tarnished in Sacramento, which was one of the reasons the name had to be changed. Somebody had gone into a lobbying session and yelled at a lawmaker, I think.
Yelled at what?
Yelled at a lawmaker. Somebody yelled at a lawmaker, started screaming at a lawmaker when they were told no about something. So
and they were publicly associated.
Yeah, with that name. So we had to change the name. We changed the name, made the position an elected position in the student body, and then we worked to. My idea was let's just take on big things. Let's make a name for ourselves by just rushing in there head first, and that's exactly what I did. And one of the reasons that first bill of mine didn't get through the Senate was exactly that, because it was my first time too. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But it was a good experience. It was a learning experience for everybody involved. For all the people in the office, there were quite a few people who worked in the office on different issues. We also, when while I was external affairs vice president, my staff, this wasn't anything I worked on directly, but we managed to get on-campus voter registration going, registered the most amount of students out of anybody in any of the other campuses.
Nice.
We got a voter registration. We got a same-day voter registration center going on campus, which didn't exist before. We negotiated that with the county registrar's office to bring it over here. So we accomplished a lot in very little time, and I'm very proud of that. Usually student governments don't really do that much, and before us they weren't doing that much, and after us, I don't know, I hope they continue doing what we're doing.
Gotta lay that foundation.
Yeah, but I mean the issue is because of the turnover rate, you never know. My hope is that whoever succeeds us, the person who's now the external affairs VP, worked in my office and was one of the people who helped a lot with the voter registration efforts. I hope they're successful. I hope they manage to continue doing what we started. But long term, that's not going to happen. Just because the turnover rate is so high, like people leave once a year. Like once a year, everybody changes. So that's why student advocacy never really gets that far, because things aren't. You can't make substantial change happen within a year. That's just not realistic, and everybody leaves within a year.
Yeah, you need to have a way to establish a groundwork for people who are still passionate about it, but who aren't involved in the elected 1 year process. That way they can continue to build year after year.
I mean, even that, people get jobs, people have lives, people have classes, students have very little time to engage in this kind of thing. My GPA dropped like a rock when I was doing all of this.
Right.
And I made the trade-off of building a strong resume and having a low GPA. I was willing to make that trade-off, and that's a really risky one, because a good GPA, a couple of good letters of recommendation from your professors, and you're good to go anywhere. Banking on maybe succeeding and maybe not succeeding, that's something that a lot of people don't want to risk, and I totally understand that. It was a big risk. But that's the issue. That's why student advocacy usually, as dedicated as people may be, is ultimately doomed to, at least to an extent, fail. Sometimes things get through, and when they do, it's amazing. But most of the time, most of the stuff that we pursue doesn't really happen.
What would you say to alumni advocacy? Would that be easier to build, you think, in your opinion, or harder?
I mean, to an extent, it's doable. For example, the Davis College Democrats Alumni Association is very active, but they're not active in the sense that they go lobby for shit, right? They're active. They don't canvass for shit. They have jobs. They have day jobs. They have to do their own things, and that's the issue with alumni too, right? Like you can't. Also, alumni have different concerns than students do. Students are concerned about student housing. Alumni are concerned about, single-family houses they want to buy. There's a big difference there.
Yeah, a lot of it's ego-driven.
Yeah, and I mean, I when I look around and say, hey, apartments aren't getting built in Davis, and that's impacting me because now I have to pay a higher rent, I'm inclined to, when an opportunity presents itself to do something about that, I'm inclined to say, okay, let's do it, because I'm getting screwed. I was paying $1,000 for a single bedroom in Davis. That's insane. Whereas once I'm out of school, why does that matter to me? I can, with a bachelor's degree from UC Davis, I can get a good job. I can even, if I have a little money saved, I can take out a mortgage, or I can rent out a house. I don't really care about apartment buildings in Davis anymore. So it's an unreasonable expectations from alumni. What the alumni can help with is funding, and that's what the Davis College Democrats alumni do very well. And I think if there could, alumni for universities fund the universities too. There was a lot of alumni donation to the university itself. And if that's something that we could build, that somebody could build, I'm out of here now, but if somebody could build a system where alumni fund advocacy efforts that are directed by the students, because only students know what students need. Advocacy efforts directed by students, funded by alumni, that could be very helpful.
Yeah. It takes someone with vision, I think. Like you're saying, I think at the core, a lot of what people do is ego-driven.
Of course.
So you're interested in building a resume. As soon as the resume is built, you're on to bigger and better things.
I think one thing that people need to understand is that resume building, for example, I got involved originally. I want to gain some experience. I want to build a resume. But then what you realize once you get into, and this is something that students learn in whatever profession they're doing, right? Whether they're studying something in STEM or humanities, whatever you're studying, nobody cares about the job title that you had when they're hiring you. They care about what you wrote under it, right? They care about the stuff that you did in that job. Nobody looks and says, "Oh, you were, I don't know, legislative director for whatever office. I'm totally going to hire you now." They're going to read the bullet points underneath to see what did you do, right? Like, did you just show up to a couple of committee hearings and said, "I support this too"? Okay, well, that's not that impressive.
Right.
And that's something that gets conflated, I feel like, when you're a student and you're looking at student jobs and you want to build your resume. That's a big point of confusion for a lot of people, or a mistake that people make. That they think, hey, I'm going to get the position, I'm going to do as little as possible, I'm going to build my resume, and I'm going to get the hell out of here.
Right. Yeah,
that doesn't really matter. Nobody cares about your job title. People care about what you wrote under your job title. And especially when you're a student and you worked in something as finicky as student government, or when you are involved in something like the political field, where really what matters is how impactful were you. Just because you had a great job title doesn't mean you're good at whatever job you're applying for.
Right.
And so if you want to build a resume, if you really want to build a resume and you're a student, you got to do as much as possible and accomplish as much as possible, so that you can say that you accomplished the things that you did.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think, like you're saying, a lot of people, they get that confused. I think people don't really care what happened as long as they see chief whatever at XYZ place. Like, as long as you have, like, some fancy title, they assume that's going to carry the weight. But I think a lot of times these corporations are aware that things can be inflated, you know?
I mean, I can't comment. I know in STEM, you say, I worked in a lab. They're like, okay, what lab did you work in and what exactly did you do? Mm-hmm. Did you clean dishes or did you, do stuff when you were in the lab? Like, were you involved in research or were you cleaning the lab after closing? I mean, obviously you're going to have to clean the lab, but, were you actually involved in the research? Were you actually working to bring about new ideas or come up with new things? Did you work closely with your mentors and professors? How are those recommendation letters going to look like? I know in politics, if I'm hiring someone, I'm going to look at their resume and I'm going to, if somebody says I was a legislative director, I'm going to ask them, okay, so what bills did you sponsor? Or co-sponsor? How did you lobby for it? What did you say in the meeting? Right? The title is important to get your foot through the door, but it's not that important.
Right. It carries some weight, but I think that's something... You made me think about it differently, because I always thought it the other way, but you think it maybe is more 60-40, 70-40 in terms of... I think it all comes down to sales. A lot of... Especially building a resume, you're selling yourself.
Yeah.
And sales comes down to telling a story, right? So you can just say, like they say, show not tell. I'm getting it confused with some English thing. Anyway...
Yeah, if you can tell, I think it's like a literature and arts thing.
Yeah, something completely different. But if you can tell a compelling story, it makes people believe you more, right? Whereas you just have a job title, it's not quite the same.
I mean, yeah, exactly. To an extent, it is show and not tell. If I tell you, hey, I'm good at lobbying, you're gonna say, okay, right. Cool, I guess, right? But if I tell you, hey, we wrote bills and we got funding for this thing, and that's showing you that I know what the fuck I'm talking about. Right. I'm not just,
Yeah, you're not state. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
nice.
kind of makes sense. I don't know.
I always hated that.
I just pulled that out of my ass.
It worked though. It worked. It's good. All right, I want you to talk a little bit about what you see as the state of politics today, and what direction you see politics as a movement. Where do you think we're going? That's kind of a big question.
Yeah.
Let's break it down a little bit.
So, it's really interesting the political dynamics of America today. It's really become, to me at least, very unpredictable, and a lot of people will disagree with that. A lot of people will say we're headed towards doom and destruction, and I mean, they're not completely wrong. That's definitely a big possibility. But when I look at the state of politics today, I see a disorganized left of the Democratic Party. I see a populist right-wing base of the Republican Party that are not in any way represented by the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. I see a corporatist wing of both the Democratic and the Republican Party, whose base is shrinking very fast, but have a stranglehold on the money.
So much, yeah.
Right, nobody likes those people. Nobody likes Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell. Nobody likes these people.
They always seem to trick people into voting for them.
Well, it's not that. It's just that they have so much money in their campaign war chests that they'll drown you out.
Yeah.
Right? Think about the media markets of somewhere like San Francisco. Right? It's incredibly expensive.
Right.
Buying ads in San Francisco is insane. It costs a lot of money. If you're an up-and-coming politician and you want to challenge Nancy Pelosi, first of all, no corporation is gonna give you money because she's their best friend and she's the Speaker of the House and they don't want to piss her off. You might be able to raise a lot of money from small dollar donations, but the media outlets and local networks aren't going to give you interviews. Local newspapers aren't going to cover you. Nobody knows your name because she's Nancy Pelosi and you're, nobody. If you want to buy ads in the media market, you're going to have to spend most of your campaign war chest, whereas Nancy Pelosi's campaign war chest is millions and millions of dollars. She can literally drown you out in ads. She can drown you out in digital ads. She can pay her campaign workers to go knock on doors, whereas you have to rely on volunteers. She can have you shut out of every influential circle and every influential event.
So much power.
So you can challenge her. Even though her approval rating is like 30% and nobody likes her in her own district, her approval rating, check me on that. But
so nobody runs against her?
Shoaib Buttar ran against her, and there were stories about him harassing. I mean, I don't know if those stories were true, but what I do know is that keeps happening. That for some reason, these allegations keep coming out against progressive candidates. And I mean, in the case of the guy, I forget his name, the guy who ran in Massachusetts, who turned out it was a complete conspiracy to ruin his chances of winning against a powerful Democratic politician. He was running, and there were these stories that turns out the college Democrats just made up about him and just tried to
Who?
I don't remember his name.
Okay.
I don't remember his name. It was in Massachusetts. It was this election cycle. Yeah, it was 2020.
2020.
It was in the primary for 2020.
Yeah, primaries they always seem to get.
Or was it a special election? I don't remember. It was last year though. But these stories keep coming out about progressive candidates. On the other hand, establishment candidates have shitloads of money, shitloads of influence, and they can shut out these progressive candidates. You have the DCCC coming out and saying, "Oh, we're getting rid of." They used to have a rule where, like, if you were a consulting firm, and you consulted for a primary challenger, they would blacklist you. So
that's a good rule. I like that rule. Yeah.
The whole point was to shut out the progressives. They got rid of that rule.
Okay.
They got rid of that rule, but then the chairman was like, we're not gonna have it as a rule. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, dude, get the fuck out of here. Like, the whole point was to discourage primary challenges against establishment Democrats. Now,
I was kind of viewing it the other way, but so you're saying it's to shut out like people who are going to support like an underdog candidate.
Yeah, I mean that's how AOC won, right? She ran again a primary and she defeated a longtime Democratic establishment figure, and she did it. And then after that, that's when they they put in the rule in place where it was if you challenge a sitting Democrat.
It was a direct reaction to her victory.
I think it was her and a couple of others who did what she did, and it was basically a direct reaction saying, if you're a consulting firm and you consult with campaigns that are challenging sitting Democrats, we're going to cut you off, right? So the whole point was to shut out progressives and shut out challenges from the left.
Interesting.
I mean, it should be interesting. What happens next? If the left can organize, they have a winning agenda. The left agenda is incredibly popular. Medicare for All is near 70% approval rating. I think at this point UBI is over 60%.
Is it 60%?
Yeah, it was at like 30, and then after the pandemic shot through, people were like, "Yeah, that was a good idea." I think UBI, Medicare for All, things like universal pre-K, free college. All of those are incredibly popular.
Right.
And the issue isn't that people don't want this stuff. The issue is that the people who want this stuff, the candidates who want this stuff, the politicians, aren't really that good at politics. While their opponents are incredibly good at politics. They've been doing politics for like the last century or so.
It's like you're saying, like, you can always dig up like skeletons in the closets of new politicians, but
or you can make shit up about them. Like, you don't even need to. It's a lot easier to make an allegation and make a splash than to then clean it up. You can make up a huge lie about somebody, blast it everywhere, and everybody will read it. But cleaning it up afterwards, like saying, "Oh wait, this wasn't true," nobody reads the
You get like a tenth of views, maybe even less.
Yeah.
You know, people are more interested in like
scandal.
What is going on? Like the retractions are never
nobody
they're printed, but they're pictured on the back pages.
Also, nobody, even if they were printed on the front page, nobody reads retractions.
Right. It's a whole nightmare. Fuck, I had something interesting to say. Okay. So, the left's moving forward? Do you think they have a winning agenda?
They have a
The right's
winning
more
agenda. They're just shitty
consolidated?
politicians. The center are great politicians. They have a losing agenda. The right-wing populists have no representation. Those are the people who are socially conservative. So they're not big fans of transgender inclusion. They're not big fans of... they keep bringing up critical race theory. I think most of them don't know what the fuck that is. But they keep bringing it up.
They're good with buzzwords.
Yeah, they're good with buzzwords. They don't like that stuff, but they're economically populist, meaning that they want more unions, they want higher wages, they want better healthcare, but at the same time they're socially conservative. That's actually the majority of the Republican base at this point, and they have zero representation in Congress. There are no real populist politicians on the right out there.
The people in power know how to appeal to the things that are going to get them to get votes without actually voting for them.
Well, yeah, you see somebody like Josh Hawley who claims to be a populist, and then he comes out and votes against an infrastructure package that's going to bring free internet, like that's going to bring broadband access, not free broadband, but broadband access and better roads and bridges to people in rural communities. Comes out and votes against that, and he calls himself a populist. Like, get the fuck out of here, dude! You're not a populist. You just call yourself that.
Yeah. It's about power for a lot of these people.
Yeah, they try. On the right, this is more true than the left, because on the left, people like Bernie, people like, AOC to an extent, but not anymore, not really. A lot of the members of the squad, people like Cori Bush, people like Jamal Bowman, they kind of got in there, right?
Okay.
They managed to get themselves in there before they were able to shut them out. And it looks like that's the trend of the Democratic Party, and that's my hope, that we slowly move towards that. 2022, Nancy Pelosi is going to retire from her speakership. It's not clear who's going to take her place. Pramila Jayapal, who's a progressive, has been gunning for that. I don't think she's going to get it, but one can hope. So on the left, the populists have some level of power. A little bit, very little bit. They're not good at exercising it. They're not good at shooting the hostage. On the right,
Give an example what you mean by shooting the hostage.
That's
Just
yeah,
to
like
rewind real quick.
Take the stimulus package. The $15 minimum wage was the big ask from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party to be included in the stimulus package, and the people like Manchin, Joe Manchin, and Kirsten Sinema said that if that's in there, we're going to vote no, right? So the Democratic leadership took that out of the bill. If the centrist Democrats, or like the right-wing Democrats, are willing to say, hey, if you include this, we're willing to vote no and kill this whole bill, then if you're on the left, you have to be, if you want to win, you have to be willing to go toe-to-toe. You have to be willing to say, hey, if you do take it out, we're going to vote no. And you have a 4% majority in the House, and the bill's going to fail because all the Republicans are going to vote no, and there's like 8 of us, and if we all vote no, you're fucked.
Right.
So go figure it out. Right? Do you care more about, is it easier to wrangle 8 people or 2 people? Your call, right?
Devil's advocate says that nothing ever gets done if that's the case.
See, that's where that's where the role of the president comes in, right? Like, or a leader or a congressional leader comes in. It's your job to pick which side you're on, and then tell the other side, hey, like if you pick, for example, if you're Joe Biden and you decide that you want the $15 minimum wage in the bill, you sit down with Joe Manchin and say, hey, if you vote for this, I'll make sure you get all the pork you want, right? Projects for West Virginia, we'll put a military base there, whatever, right? If you vote no on this, nothing will happen in West Virginia while I'm president.
Right.
I will dry you to the bone. I will get a primary. I will dry your state to the bone. Then I'll get a primary challenger out there that's going to vote with me, and I'm gonna put all my support behind that guy. And I have a 65% approval rating, and you have a 42% approval rating. I'm gonna fly to West Virginia. I'm gonna put my hands around that guy in the middle of a band gazebo, and get you out of office. So you pick one of those. You want to be my best friend, or you want me to be your worst enemy? You pick your side, and that's where you become a leader. If you can't do that, if you can't rally your own troops, then you shouldn't be a leader.
So I agree with you. I think we do need a cut for a leader like that, especially for the Democrats.
That's what LBJ used to do.
I don't know if it necessarily works in the case of Manchin, just because he makes his whole thing is that he's like the anti-Democrat, you know? It's like this...
Yes, so you primary him out.
Yeah.
You kick him out. I mean, if he wants to be an anti-Democrat, then he's not a Democrat. Kick him out. Mm-hmm. What use is having somebody there who's... what use is having a member of your own party who never votes with his own party? That's just a Republican. You're better off primarying and not getting another Democrat in there. You're better off with another Republican in there, because at least then you don't have to pretend like you like him.
Yeah.
Like,
he's pretty entrenched though. You know, and even like Joe Biden, like you said, flying out to West Virginia, that might actually get more people around him. Because like if Joe Biden's against him, all of a sudden he's like, oh, maybe he is on our side. The Republicans in the state are like, maybe he has something.
well, yeah, but Republicans don't get to vote in Democratic
the
primaries,
primary.
so it doesn't really matter.
The primary is such a weird system, man.
I mean, California is interesting because we have an open primary, so everybody just runs, and the top two go to a runoff. But so it's not really a primary; it's just we have a runoff election system. But in most states, it's closed primaries, and it's weird.
Yeah.
To be registered with the party, but I mean that's why they did that though. That's why closed primaries exist to begin with. It was built that way so that party leadership could exert influence over their members and say, hey, if you don't do what we tell you to, we're gonna primary you and put somebody who is gonna do what we tell them to. I mean, LBJ is the most famous one. There are stories that he used to like beat up senators in the closet, like physically beat up senators like drag them into a closet in the Senate and beat the shit out of them. Like the guy was fucking out of his mind. But I'm not saying do that, you know.
You want to go up to that point, but not over.
Yeah, I also don't think Biden can do that. Like he drags Joe Manchin into a closet and then he just keels over and dies. Like falls asleep in the middle of a fist fight or some shit like that. I don't know. But
okay, I want you to, if you can, you don't have to, but if you could talk about a couple members of like from the left, a couple members of the right, maybe some centrists who you think like maybe you have some respect for. Do you think you could do that?
On the right, in the media sphere, there are a couple of people.
Sure.
I would say people like, I mean, I don't even think they are. I don't even know if they consider themselves right wing. I don't agree with with a lot of what they say.
Well,
but
yeah, I'm not. Yeah, the politics for one thing, but like more like the person.
I like Sagar and Jetty. He used to be on the Rising. Now he's on Breaking Points. I like Marshall Kosloff. I like Rachel Boulevard. I like. I forget her name. There was another person, I forgot her name. Doesn't matter. On the left, there are a few more.
Right.
On the politician side, I do like Nina Turner. She just lost her primary, and that was pretty sad. I had high hopes for her. I thought if she had gotten elected to Congress with her attitude towards, we're gonna fuck shit up, I thought that was gonna be very helpful. I thought that she could have become a leader for the progressives that don't really have a leader at the moment. I like Cori Bush, the willingness to sleep on the steps of the U.S. Capitol for a few nights to get the eviction moratorium. I think that's real dedication there. I like Jamal Bowman. On the media side, I like Kyle Kowinski, Crystal Ball. I used to really like Jimmy Dore, not as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of went off the rails. But yeah.
What about like towards the center?
See, my issue with the center, I don't really like anybody in the center in American politics. Maybe like the closest person to the center that I like is David Pakman, who does his YouTube show, but he's not really a centrist. I don't really like the center in American politics because it's a false center.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people, especially from Europe, they say like our left is more like Europe's center.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
And the far left is more like a real left, but it's kind of painted as this boogeyman.
Yeah, well, we don't really have a real left, right? Like in France, they have in France and Germany, in most of Europe, they have like straight up communist parties. That's the left.
Right.
It's
very left.
And people here don't understand that there's a big difference between somebody like Bernie Sanders, who wants to do who's essentially a social democrat. Like he just wants to do universal healthcare and free college. That's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
You want to see a real left? Like take a trip down to Europe. You have communists there who want to, seize the means of production, turn the country into socialism, and then bring it into communism later. You have real communists down there, and we don't. Here we don't have. I mean, we have communists, sure, but they don't have any power.
No power.
There's nobody knows the name of a prominent communist in America in today's America. Like, have you ever heard of a prominent communist in today's America? I don't know any.
I don't think so. Like maybe once, but I forgot them.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like here, we don't really. We have a real right. Like for sure, we have a real right, but we don't have a real left. Mm-hmm. Our left, where Bernie Sanders and AOC and the Squad are, is where the center of most European countries are. Like people like Angela Merkel and people like Macron and people like even like conservatives in the UK, right? Mm-hmm. Are closer. Somebody like what's his face, Boris Johnson in England,
Yeah.
is closer to in policy. He's closer to someone like Bernie than people compared him to Trump all the time, but he's closer to Bernie than he's to Trump, right? He funded. I mean, he tried. The conservatives have been trying to slowly privatize the NHS, but when shit hit the fan, when it came down to it, when COVID hit, Boris, I don't like the guy. I think he's wrong on like 99% of things. But when shit hit the fan, he funded the NHS. He did the right thing, and on policy issues, he's very right wing on immigration, he's right wing on on a number of social issues, but at the end of the day, on economic issues, he's closer to someone like Bernie.
Interesting.
I would say he's somewhere like where Hillary was. Hillary was really left of Biden, which blows my mind. How the hell did we end up here? But someone like Boris Johnson is pretty much where Hillary was.
Right.
Versus, and he always was compared to Trump. Our left is the center in Europe. Our left is in the left.
Yeah.
We live in
Strange
magic
times.
fantasy land. Yeah. That's one way to put it. Yeah.
Dang. Keep thinking of good questions, then you're just like you're going.
I talk a lot.
No, it's good. That's what
I'm
I want.
in politics. I talk a lot.
That's what I want. Fuck. Okay. Philosophy.
I'll drink beer while you think.
Dang it, because I wanted to create this distinction, but like you're also involved in so DSUCD. I don't know if I explained.
ASUCD.
Yeah. That's more like it's like fake politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you have like a little group. You guys are pretty into the.
We
fake
decided to
politics
make
as well.
it real politics.
Yeah, you made it. Real.
Yeah, so that's like ASUCD is basically, and like all student governments, it's basically fake government, right? Like people get together and vote. The issue with Davis is that it really isn't that fake, because ASUCD owns the city's bus system. It owns the biggest restaurant and the biggest food complex in Davis. It's a $14 million, well, 15 now, nonprofit operation. It's one of the biggest nonprofits in California, and it's all student run, purely student run, and students come into it with the assumption that it's fake politics, and it really isn't that fake. Like, people's jobs are on the line. Students earn their living off of this thing. Unitrans drivers are some of the highest student wage earners anywhere, right? They make $20 something an hour, and these people live off of this money. And if the whole thing crumbles down, which it was really close to doing, then all these people lose their jobs. People lose their jobs. People lose their housing. The housing's already expensive in Davis. You lose your job, you lose your housing, and all these people were coming into this with the understanding, we're going to do advocacy, and we're going to try to get admin to do this and this. That's not your job. Your job is to run like a straight up company that not a company, but like a straight up nonprofit that employs 1,000 people. This is it's not even a small business. It's a big business. You have a cat?
It's like a backyard cat. It doesn't belong to me or the house. I don't think.
How's it called around?
Yeah. I think it's one of the neighbors on the fence all the time.
It's like your job is to run this big business. 100 people is considered a small business. We have 1,000 employees at ASUCD, so it's a straight up big business, and that's not what they were doing. That wasn't at all what they were doing. So we got there and we were like, whoa, shit, this thing's about to go bankrupt in a year. So we fixed that.
There you go.
Our administration team passed the fee referendum, increased the student fees to be members in ASUCD. We had to get 20% of the students had to actually vote in the election, which never happens. It did. And we had to get a 60% margin, and that did happen. So we got that. We wrote down like a 10-year plan that added up to like $500 million of spending plans and revenue plans on how to get it and how to get it done. We put that all together and we left it to the people to follow. We left it to the staff. So ACCD is big enough to hire full-time staff, and we left it with we left the 10-year business plan with the full-time staff and told them to make sure people follow it. And that's been happening so far. They're actually ahead of the plan, which I'm pretty happy about. The current administration's ahead of the plan that we left them. So we did that, and then we also got involved in real politics, introducing bills, getting the state to do things. The president, when I was the VP, was Justin Hurst, who 100% supported all the political things that I was doing in the Capitol, and him and I were the architects of the 10-year plan, and him and Kevin Rodenkolber did the fee referendum. So, we saved those jobs and we increased the revenue. Now, I hope they keep following the plan. They're ahead of the plan. Hopefully they'll keep following it and not bring the whole thing down. I mean, they're really not going to be able to. The way we did it is pretty foolproof, but you never know. It's it's one of those things where you come to any UC other than Davis, you can go do fake politics. It doesn't matter. It's not going to impact anybody. You come to Davis, once every few years, somebody comes along and fixes everything, and that's why the whole thing hasn't gone. Other UCs had the same deal that we had. Like, they had autonomy, they were doing their own thing, and all of them fell one by one because they all went bankrupt, and their administration had to save them, and then they basically became fake politics, right? Like, places where people yell at each other over issues that doesn't matter to anybody but them. In Davis, that never happened. Every once in a few years, somebody came along and saved it, right? It was us this time. It was Jack Zwolt the last time, who was the president back then. And I'm sure somebody else will do it again a few years from now. But because of that, we employ 1,000 people, more than 1,000 people. And if you fuck it up, all those students are going to lose their jobs. And the admin is going to be better off hiring full-time staff to do those jobs, because then they don't have to train them every year. They don't have to, go through a whole process every year. They can just pay them a flat wage and not deal with it. So all those student jobs just go, 1,000 student jobs just go away. So if you come to Davis, it's not fake politics. It's people's lives.
Politics. True believer.
Yeah, it's like, it's people's lives. You can't screw around with that shit.
It's awesome. Very cool.
I mean, it's awesome for
I like how
some people.
I'm really interested in organizing and grassroots. You said you got more people than ever voted before. You got that 60% margin. Talk about how you raised awareness of these things. How do you get people together interested in voting?
So, I was mostly involved with writing the 10-year plan and doing the background stuff. I wasn't on the ground organizing. I know that Justin did a lot of the organizing, and Shreya Deshpande also. I know you know Shreya, right?
I'm sure
I think you've met her. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was the internal vice president. They did a lot of the organizing, but organizing ultimately comes down to building relationships with grassroots. So there are two types of organizing. There's grassroots and grass tops, and people usually confuse the two. Grass tops organizing is say, hey, there is the Davis College Dems. There is California. There is the women voters groups. There is Ignite, which is another women's group, and I'm gonna talk to their leaders and get them to get their members to come out and vote. Right, that's grass tops organizing. That's going to the leaders of small groups. Right, it's still the grasses, but you're going to the top of the grasses. You're talking to the leaders of smaller groups, and you're getting them out there. Grassroots is when you go to their meeting and you talk. When you go door to door and you knock on doors. Where you go make announcements in coffee shops. Where you give out flyers in the middle of the street. Where you something that's interesting that I consider grassroots organizing, but a lot of people don't, is personalized social media ads, where you're targeting people individually based on their interests. I think that's a type of grassroots organizing.
Sure.
You're reaching out to individuals. You're trying to get them interested and energized about something.
Especially if you narrow down the focus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think all those elements combine to be grassroots organizing. Now, for this referendum, I know that mostly they did grass tops organizing, meaning they went to these meetings. They did talk to the members, but they also talked to the leadership to make sure, because there are 4 people running a campaign. You can't be everywhere at once.
Right.
What you have to do is get the leaderships of smaller groups together, and get them to get their members to come out and vote. Right. One thing that I want to talk about, because you brought up grassroots organizing, and we were talking about general politics earlier.
Sure.
Is, and this is something that I saw in ASUCD and something that I see in left politics everywhere, is this whole idea that you have to do organizing to make change happen. And that's definitely true. You need organizing. But organizing by itself doesn't do anything. If I get 2,000 people to show up to the Capitol tomorrow morning and say we want student housing reform, nothing's going to happen. Right. Nobody cares that 2,000 people showed up. What would make change happen is if you get a few members of the legislature, you get a bill introduced, you have a committee hearing scheduled, then on the day of that committee hearing, you get 2,000 people to show up.
Timing.
Right?
Yeah.
Grassroots organizing in a vacuum, or organizing of any kind in a vacuum, doesn't accomplish anything. And a lot of political activists are like, oh, we're going to organize, we're going to protest. It's like, okay, good for you. That's not going to do anything. You're not going to make anything happen. You want to make a real change? Build the relationships first. Have things in place so that when you organize, you push it past the line. You don't just show up.
So you think that if we can connect organizers to leaders, like idea people, we'd be able to get more change?
That's how any kind of change happens, right? The reason you had something like the civil rights movement succeed is that Martin Luther King Jr. went and met with JFK. He met with senators. He met with party leadership. He came to Washington, D.C. And then when things were ultimately going down, there was grassroots support that was able to show up and say, "Hey, we want this change to happen." But the change was written on paper. It had to be voted on, and people showed up. You know, the Civil Rights Act and then the Voting Rights Act were written down to be introduced, and then people showed up and supported those ideas. Change doesn't happen via one thing. You can't do one thing and expect it to make change happen. You have to do a multitude of things. When women got the right to vote, right, there were like three or four different prominent women's groups that were active at the same time. You had people like Alice Paul, who was protesting in front of the White House in the middle of the World War, got dragged to prison. They were force-fed food when they went on a hunger strike, which, according to psychologists, is psychological impact of force feeding is very close to the psychological impact of rape, because you
It's a powerful statement.
Yeah, no, that's not my thing. That's
right.
Yeah, and they force-fed these women food, and they treated them horribly in the prisons, in the jails. They didn't go to prison; they went to jail. They were arrested on bogus charges, and they were arrested because they were not supporting the war. Which, I mean, talk about a blatant violation of the First Amendment. And then they came out, and like they managed to get writing out of what was happening to them. And that embarrassed the administration. And at the same time, you had grassroots people going state to state, wrangling up, getting state legislatures to grant women the right to vote, getting people to support it. You had other organized or other women's leadership groups who were meeting with members of the legislature, who were getting people on board to get the amendment introduced. It was a whole thing. All of this came together to give women the right to vote. None of those things would have succeeded with the other elements.
Yeah.
If MLK had just showed up to the Capitol with a few thousand people, would have been great for the cameras. But if no bill was written, if no legislator was on board,
can't prepare.
You can't pass the Civil Rights Act. You have to have people in power on board. You have to have leaders who are willing to engage. You have to have advocates who know what they're doing in the halls of power, and you have to back up those demands with organizers. And massive organizing. These people can be the same people, right? You can have somebody like MLK who was both an organizer and a leader.
Right.
Doesn't matter. The point is, you have to put these elements together. And on the left especially, a lot of times this doesn't connect. People don't get that.
The frustrating thing is I think it almost requires the perfect storm in order to get things done. Like you need to have the organizing, you need to have the right people interested who do have the power, and you need to do it in stages, right? Like you don't have credibility if you just show up as one person, like it's like I have an idea. You just go to the leader. That's not gonna happen. Yeah. Well, see.
Like when I did my first bill in the legislature, I had a title to be sure. I was the chief of staff to the first vice president. Nobody knew who the fuck that was. Nobody knew what the fuck ACCD was. Right. So I literally cold called offices of members of the legislature who I knew were interested in water policy and agriculture policy and the environment. I was like, I knew these people are interested in this.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to call them up and see if this is something they want to do, right? See if this is something they're interested in. And I found someone. Somebody named Barra Khan, who had just been elected that year. Her office, she was interested in doing it, and we did it, right? And then we built credibility off of that, right? We got the bill introduced. We got the bill past the Assembly. We built a relationship with the California Climate and Agriculture Network. We did the work, but you have to be willing to, you can't, the biggest thing everybody, especially students who want to do political work, need to understand is that you don't need to, like, you can just walk in.
Right.
Like, you have to do more work to be heard, right? Like, if I hit somebody up now after 2 years, 3 years of working around the Capitol, I have many relationships in the building. I have many friends in the building. I can call somebody up. State Capitol, yeah. I can call somebody up and be like, hey, this is something I want to do. Do you know if anybody's interested? I'm shopping around this bill. I know how to do it. I know the people I need to talk to. But that would never have happened if that one time I hadn't just cold called like 50 members, right?
Hell yeah.
You gotta do that first.
What was your response to call ratio? So you called 50. right? How many
I
of those?
got most of them. Most of them
most
got
of
back
them
to me and said, no, sorry,
No.
we can't.
You
Right?
got one yes.
Like the moment I
That's
got
all
my
you need.
yes, that was it.
Hell yeah.
Right? Like that's all you need. You need one
Mhm.
to say yes. Then you get started. Then the hard part starts. Right?
Right.
Getting the yes isn't the hard part. Then you have to organize. Right? Then you have to. Once you get somebody in power on board, then you have to organize around it, and that's the part that we failed at. That's the part that we were students. We were trying to do something in agriculture. It wasn't. We didn't have any connections in the farming communities around the state. That's where the California Climate and Agriculture Network came in, and they did a lot of the grass tops and grassroots organizing to support the bill. But but ultimately, once you get the yes, then you get the ball rolling, and you do and then you do the organizing, and you do the grass tops and the grassroots organizing, and you build media support. You get opinion pieces out. You build a whole public affairs campaign around it, and you make change happen. But change doesn't happen because a bunch of protesters showed up to an office.
Mm-hmm. It's a part, but not, or can be a part.
I was on a lobbying trip with J Street, and they decided to do a protest in front of the Israeli embassy for.
In SAC?
No, in Washington D.C.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was on a lobbying trip with J Street in Washington D.C. and they wanted to do a protest. J Street U wanted to do a protest in front of the Israeli embassy, and to oppose demolitions of Palestinian villages.
Right. Yeah. Tricky.
And I went. I'm not a big. I don't usually go to protests, but everybody around was going. I was like, oh, well, I'll go.
Might as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Showed up, and I was like, so, okay, what are we doing? They're like, we're standing here and we're holding these signs up and we're saying these things. I'm like, okay, is there anybody in the embassy? Then I'm like, no, it's the weekend, nobody's there. I'm like, okay. Did you guys call any news outlets? They're like, what? I'm like, did you call like CNN or someone? We're in the nation's capital. This is a big international organization that showed up here to protest. Did you call CNN? And they're like, no. I'm like, why are we here? Like, what are we doing here? Nobody's gonna see us here. What's the point of being here? They're like, we're gonna put it on social media. I'm like, how many people do follow you, dude? Like, nobody's gonna see this. Nobody gives a shit. We're just like 200 people gathered in 200 pro-Israel activists have gathered in front of the Israeli embassy to protest a policy of the Israeli government in Washington D.C. You didn't call the news networks?
Right.
What are we doing? You didn't even call like local news?
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck are we doing here? Like that's the thing. You can't just show up and protest. That doesn't do anything. Nobody gives. There was nobody in the embassy. It's like who are we doing this for? Like the 200 people who you're friends with on Facebook? Like, who cares?
Yeah, you gotta connect the organizers to the thinkers. It's crucial. It's great. So what ended up happening?
Nothing.
You didn't call anybody. You didn't get anybody.
No, it was too late. You can't, like, you have to send a press release like 2 weeks in advance.
2 weeks.
You have to coordinate with reporters and can't like. Yeah, I called up CNN while I was there. I was there like, oh, we wish you told us 2 weeks ago. We would have had a crew out there. I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't organize this. It's like,
how many people were there?
Like there were like more than 200 people.
200. That's.
You had 200 people in front of the Israeli embassy. It's like you didn't call like. What?
What was the best sign you saw?
I don't even remember, dude. It's like most of it was stop demolitions. Like most of it was pretty generic stuff. They didn't have.
Sometimes there's inventive signs. I like those artistic, cool slogans. But let's talk a little bit about bills, because that's always been like a frustrating thing. Like how it goes back to organizing a little bit, but you have a bill like starts off innocuously, right? And then by the time it's passed or not passed, there's like a million footnotes that change the bill entirely.
In Congress, to be sure.
Right.
In state government, it's not like that.
Not
but
as bad.
It's not at all like that. You can't do like the deadlines for amendments are like 3,000 bills and like 40 people are working on them. So it's, in Congress, it's different. In Congress, so the issue in Congress is that the congressional offices have many staff members. They have each committee has its own staff members. There are compared to a state government, even California's state government, which is the biggest, the most, not the biggest one in terms of number of representatives, but the most robust state government in the country, and the best funded one. There aren't as many lobbyists. They're nowhere close to as many lobbyists here. They don't get close to as much as there are literally thousands and thousands of lobbyists in DC on any given issue that you talk about, right? Agriculture, thousands and thousands of lobbyists. Environment, thousands and thousands. Energy, thousands and thousands. in California, there are maybe like 100, like 50 lobbyists on a given issue, right? Like I know every lobbyist who works in higher education, every single one. There's like 20 of them, right?
Okay.
Like in DC, there's like 200, right? Like
Yeah.
so
200 for every issue. Yeah.
yeah, it's that's the thing. Like it's in DC, because there are so many people. There are also like 435 members of the House, 100 senators, and each of them have many members of their staff, all of whom are political people with political opinions, who convince their bosses to do this or that, and the bosses, the members of Congress, they don't really have time to sit down and read every bill. Each bill is a couple thousand pages long.
Right. Yeah, a lot of times, you said a couple hundred pages long?
There are bills that are thousands of pages long. There's like appropriations bills are usually like, the annual budget bills are usually, I think, like 20,000. It's some crazy shit number like that.
How do we expect our politicians to make an informed choice if they're getting a short summary of something
Right,
that's thousands
you
of
can't make
pages
an
long?
informed choice. That's the issue. You can't make an informed choice when you can't read the thing you're supposed to make a choice about.
Yeah, and then they have 24 hours where they're supposed to scan.
That's why there's so many staff members.
Yeah, that's a nightmare. God, fuck that. All right, do you think there's a place for lobbyists in our current government?
I think lobbying should be based on merit, not on how much money you have.
Okay.
Right? I think you have to get money out of politics. I think you have to make.
So hard.
Yeah, it's for at this point, the only way you're gonna do that is the constitutional amendment, right? Like you're not gonna get it done. I guess
constitutional amendment would be what 75% of the states.
It's two-thirds of. Is it 2/3 of states and I think 3/4 of both houses, or the other way around?
And the people who are voting are the people who get the money.
Yeah, it's the very members of Congress who are making that. You can't even get an act of Congress passed that limits money in government. Those are the people who are getting that's the issue with corruption. You can't root out corruption.
Yeah.
Because the people who are supposed to root it out are the people who are corrupt.
They're the corrupt.
It's like you can't. Once corruption becomes entrenched, you can't really get rid of it.
New system. Fuck.
There is, there you can start getting money out of politics state by state, right? That's something you could do.
Right.
But even that is going to take years and years. It's not really something that's doable and something that's really easy to get rid of really fast.
It seems like there's so many issues, and that brings back to what we were talking about earlier a little bit. Just at least my opinion, I think we disagreed on this a little bit, but the left, it just seems like they're so split.
They are very split. They're split on some policy issues, but overall they usually agree on policy. Mostly the issue is that they don't like each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Hard to like politicians, really.
It's not just the politicians, it's also all the media figures, all the commentators. It's the left is really fast to turn on itself, right? Even if the disagreement is really minute, most lefties agree on 95% of policy issues. Policy issues aren't the issue. It's that, they are to an extent. Even on those 5%, they're willing to tear each other apart.
Right.
On the right, they don't give a shit if they disagree on 5% of shit. All they want to do is prevent the leftists from doing anything. So, ultimately...
Vastly different goals. It creates a more unified right.
And that's mostly in right-wing politicians, not right-wing voters. You
Right.
look at voters on the right, and you'll be surprised on how many issues they actually agree with on the left. It's what? Why are you voting for Republicans? Because the Democrats suck.
How do you think change comes on the right? How do you see these people you see are underrepresented on the right? Is there a way for their voice to be heard?
The only way that's ever going to happen, and that's why I really liked Bernie's 2016 campaign, and I didn't like his 2020 campaign. And I don't like saying this because I do think social issues are important, but I think that a lot of our current social issues and social injustices ultimately, and this is where I disagree with critical race theory, I think a lot of our social strife ultimately originates from economic problems, right? I'm not a class reductionist. There are obviously racial elements in injustices in our society, for sure. There's,
I don't think most people disagree with you, but the way that they express that disagreement or agreement is different.
No, some people do disagree with me, especially on the left. There are a lot of people who will say that no, everything comes down to race, or no, everything comes down to ultimately that's the gist of critical race theory to an extent, is that every institution is inherently racist because it was built by racists 200 years ago. They're not completely wrong. A lot of it was.
Contributes to the problem.
My issue is that in today's day and age, the only way you're going to fix that is if you approach it from an economic perspective, approach it from outside of the sphere of race, and say, hey, there are these conservative people who get scared when you talk to them about race.
Mm-hmm.
But they want marijuana to be legalized and the records to be flushed. Why? Because they want to smoke weed.
Right.
Right? Who's that going to impact the most, though? If you flush the records of the people who've been convicted for marijuana possession, the same way that criminalization of marijuana disproportionately affected black and brown people, if you legalize it and flush the records, that's going to disproportionately benefit the people who were disproportionately harmed by the original law. Right? When you talk about funding, when you talk about, people come out and talk about, we should fund minority schools more because they've been underfunded historically. I'm like, oh no, don't say it like that.
Yeah.
Come out and say, hey, we should fund underfunded schools.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to include inner city schools that have been underfunded, that are majority minority. But that's also going to increase funding to rural schools, whereas some places you have one teacher in history class teaching history and in a high school teaching history and biology and doesn't know anything about biology or history.
Right. They're like an English major.
Yeah, in the middle of buttfuck nowhere in the rural areas. It's a huge problem. We need to... So the approach to politics, and some people will disagree with this. They'll say, oh no, we have to call out racism. And I agree that we have to call out racism. I just don't think that making every political issue about race... See, in 2016 when Bernie ran, he went up there and said, the top 10% of the top 10... he was just ranting out numbers.
Yeah.
And people loved it.
Right.
In 2020, he started every speech by saying, we have a president who's a racist and a sexist. Mm-hmm. Well, 50% of the American people voted for this fucker. Mm-hmm. When you call that guy a racist and a sexist, yeah, he is a racist and a sexist. Fuck that guy.
Right.
But
you're not telling anyone things they don't know.
You're not telling anyone things that they don't know.
And we don't even believe, we don't think that Bernie doesn't think that. He's not like...
Yeah, we all know you think that. There's nobody on your side who doesn't already know that Trump is a racist and a sexist. The only thing you're doing by calling him a racist and a sexist is basically saying to his supporters that by proxy, you're racists and sexists too.
That is what they hear.
And yeah, of course that's what they hear. That's what I would hear if somebody told me that, a person I voted for is evil. I'd be like, so you're telling me that I voted for somebody who's evil, so you think I'm bad? Of course that's what they hear, right?
Comes back to tribalism a lot.
Of course it does. Yeah, and that's the issue. You don't want to attack the person whom those people are associated with. You want to attack the billionaires? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Nobody likes them. Nobody likes them. Nobody likes the billionaires. Mm-hmm. You want to attack them? Go ahead. Don't attack the guy who 50% of the country voted for and 30% of the country fucking worships at this point. That's not going to get you anywhere.
Right.
A lot of those people are poor people who would be in your coalition if you didn't call them racist and sexist. They might be racist even, right? Those people might even be racist. Okay, whatever. Get their vote, win, and then address the root causes that lead to institutional racism, that lead to institutionalized discrepancies between racial groups.
Right.
Fix the education system.
And like you were saying earlier, these fixes, they do help members of disadvantaged races, but they also are going to help poor white people. So it is there's a good split, right?
It's also you got to remember black and brown communities in America are disproportionately poor, meaning that even though there are more poor white people than there are poor black people, just because there are more white people in general, a higher percentage of the black community is poor compared to the white community.
Yeah.
So if you do things for people who are poor, you will disproportionately help minority groups.
Mm-hmm. And you can unite.
Is that enough to make up for all the injustices of the past? No, nothing's going to make up for slavery. You can't make up for slavery. You're never going to make up for decades of redlining in one presidential term. You could try to make up for decades of redlining for sure, but nothing's going to make up for slavery. Nothing's going to make up for something like the Chinese Exclusion Act in the peak of the economic growth of the country. Nothing's going to make up for Japanese internment. Mm-hmm. Nothing's going to make up for these things. You can't make up for things that are just so over the top evil. You can't make up for it. Mm-hmm. What you can do is look at the situation that you have in the country right now. You can see how black children are going to worse schools than white children, proportionally speaking. You can look at how Latino children are going to worse schools than white children. You can look at how academic performance varies so much between these different racial groups. You can look at how initiatives like No Child Left Behind and standardized tests have screwed over minority communities, even though they weren't intended to.
Right.
And then you can turn around and say, okay, so we need to have a better approach. We need to have a universal approach because that's the only way we're going to get everybody to vote for us, right? But we need to have a better approach. We need to increase funding to schools based on the facilities and equipment that they have. We need to give teachers better salaries.
Yeah,
we need to, I mean, I would go as far as to say, why the hell do we have such a fragmented education system? Most developed countries have nationalized education systems. Why is ours like a patchwork of like really good places like Massachusetts and really shitty education systems like California?
Well, it goes like it comes back to racism, like you're saying. This historical like white communities, they come in, like they've segregation allowed them to separate, and then they go, oh no, we need our own schools now.
Yeah,
private education. And they're like, oh, we need funding for our private schools.
No, it's not even private school. Public schools are like, you look at somewhere
charter
like
schools. Yeah.
No, it's not. No, not charter schools. Like straight up public schools.
Right.
You look at public schools in Massachusetts, which is like goes between 1 and 3 in the country in terms of like how good they are. Public schools, not charter schools, not private schools, just public schools.
Okay.
California is number 44. Massachusetts number like
44 in the country.
Oh yeah,
overall?
California's a fucking train
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, California's a train wreck. Yeah, we're like we're there's like 2 behind us because we're like there are ties throughout the states, so there are like only 2 states that are behind us in terms of how bad their education is. It's like I think it's Kentucky and Oklahoma.
Oh really?
Or Mississippi might be Yeah, it's pretty bad.
If we're tied to Mississippi, that's bad.
Yeah. So California's education system is a train wreck. Why is it a train wreck? Well, a lot of it is racism, right? Because the people who built the education system created zip code funding. And California is an incredibly diverse state, right? Massachusetts has zip code funding too, but less than California does. They have more of a split with the state government, but California has mostly zip code funding. It's a more diverse state than Massachusetts or Connecticut or Maryland, right? And so zip code funding, because the state is more diverse, that racist policy that was put in place, it's a racist policy. Zip code funding was meant to be racist. It was meant to make white schools better than black schools. That was the whole point. But if you're trying to change the policy and you come out and say this is racist and we want to like give more money to black schools and give less money to white schools, all the white parents are going to be like, fuck you, we're going to vote for the other guy. Right?
All they hear is not us.
Yeah, and it's not just that they're like the racist. Some of them might be, but most of it is we want what's best for our kids. And that's perfectly reasonable from a parent, from any parent. They want what's best for their kids, and they're going to oppose anybody who wants to take money from their schools and give it to other schools. So what you do say is, we're going to increase funding to education overall, and we're going to target it towards schools that have been underfunded to make sure that all the schools, we're going to increase funding to everybody, but we're going to increase funding more to schools that have been underfunded to make sure they have the same amenities and facilities and accommodations that everybody else has. Right? You put it like that, and suddenly people are like, oh, they want to make education better. Great, let's do it, right?
Yeah.
That's the issue that divides the left to a very large extent, is what to focus on in rhetoric. Nobody thinks that funding education is bad. You won't find a single person on the left who's like, education, I don't like it. Yeah, on the right you will, there are people who don't like public education, like Betsy DeVos. But you won't find anybody on the left who thinks public education is bad. But, how do you phrase it?
How do you phrase it? You think it's rhetoric. Interesting. Yeah, like it comes back to this idea of sales. Politics is sales.
Yeah, ultimately.
Tell a story. Okay, I like that. I want to circle back to this. You said lobbyists have a place in our current government, but you want it to be merit-based. Talk about that.
Right. So you got to get money out of politics, and that's virtually impossible. But if you do, then yeah, I think lobbyists do have a place in our politics because I think interest groups and nonprofits and even corporations have interests, right? And they are entitled to express that interest. That's the very basis of free speech. What they're not entitled to do is bribe politicians to do their bidding, right? So you can lobby, like I lobbied, I didn't have a dime to give the politicians, we were a student group, right? Like we didn't have money to spend. We still managed to make change happen. Why? Because we made meritocratic arguments. So when I say lobbying needs to be merit-based, I mean you need to be able to convince the politicians without bribing them that what you're saying is good. These are people who were elected by the people of this country to represent the interests of the people of this country because the people who voted for them thought that they had good judgment, right? Lobbyists have a place because they're supposed to go in there and say, hey, this is what we think. We're experts in this, right? Like, think about agriculture, right? You get somebody elected from San Francisco to U.S. Congress. They're gonna know nothing about agriculture. They lived in San Francisco their entire life, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that person? How does that person decide how to vote on an agriculture bill? For example, on the federal farm bill, right? Which is one of the biggest funding sources for farmers in the country, right? How does that person decide how to vote? Well, obviously their staff is going to make some recommendations, to be sure, but that's just two people. There are thousands and thousands of experts in agriculture. There are thousands of interest groups. There are different farm groups. There are different interests, business interests. There are nonprofits. There are workers, unions, like agriculture unions, who have interests, and those people need to talk to their politicians in some way. And the only way they're going to do that is to send a lobbyist. That's what a lobbyist does. They just go talk to a politician. What's the problem in our country today is that lobbyists have become funders, bribers. They bribe the politicians to do the bidding of their masters.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't work. That's just corruption.
Well, it does work.
I mean, it doesn't work well. It works. It's a.
It doesn't work system. For us.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They end up getting what they want, though.
Oh yeah, it works for them, to be sure. But the way you want lobbying to work is, hey, you represent a group that has an interest in this issue,
mm-hmm.
and you come talk to me. If I'm a member of the legislature, you represent a group that has an interest. You come talk to me. You convince me that you're right? Present your argument.
Present the argument.
Right?
Fuck yeah.
Don't bribe me. That
mm-hmm.
should never be the case. Just convince me.
Yeah.
Meritocratic lobbying.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. But it's like we're circling back to the money thing. Everything comes back to money, you know? Like, they want more money, because, like, now all of a sudden they can do the things they want to do. And, like,
well,
money.
What's interesting is the money isn't going directly to the politicians, it's going to campaigns.
Yeah.
And
but they need the campaigns.
Yeah, but campaigns need the money. Well, what's interesting is there are quite a few studies in political science that have shown that once you have name recognition, money doesn't matter at all.
You don't think so?
It's not that I don't think so. It's like there are like a gajillion studies by political scientists and statisticians that say it doesn't matter.
That's very interesting. Because, okay, I heard this. I'm not 100% sure, but I've heard it several times. But a lot of top politicians, they do their policy work, and then they go in and they make calls. Like, especially during election season. They make calls all the time.
So you need there's like a threshold, right? Money matters to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Once you pass that threshold, it's just what's it called? Diminishing returns.
Right. Yeah,
so you need enough money to be able to tell people, hey, there's an election, you should go vote, and you should vote for me, mm-hmm. right? Past that point, money doesn't matter. And the issue in our current politics is that politicians, advertisers, and most people don't really get that. Like, all you need if you have two people who have no name recognition running if you have two people who both have name recognition running a congressional campaign, past $400,000, the study the last study that I read showed this. Past $400,000 or $500,000, I don't remember exactly, doesn't matter anymore. Mm-hmm. The money doesn't make a difference, right? If you both have name recognition, the money isn't doing anything for you.
Right. But that comes back to the problem with challenging from a place of no name recognition.
Then you need money, because you need the money to build your name recognition, right?
But no money and no name equals no votes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you can't challenge somebody like Nancy Pelosi unless you're also famous.
Also,
but if you are famous and you challenge Nancy Pelosi, as long as you raise enough money to like tell people that you're running, mm-hmm. you're fine. Right? You don't need money to drown her out. That's not necessary. If you're famous and you're challenging Nancy Pelosi, all you need is enough money to say, hey, I'm running, you should vote for me, here's what I think, right? And just to get that to enough people so that, when they go out to vote, they know that you're on the ballot. That's it. You don't need to drown her out. It's a fast. When I read the first time I read a study like that, I was like, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't make sense. And I read a few more, and I was like, holy shit, this is real.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Okay. Let's see, I want to kind of close up the political part before we tie up the end of this, nearing the end. Do you have anything else you want to say about politics?
No, really.
I kind of
covered pretty much
a lot. Yeah. All right. I wanted to ask you. This is a very big left turn.
Okay.
But have you ever had a spiritual experience?
Nah.
No. Is that something you're seeking, or like?
Not really.
Not really.
I mean,
if it comes, it comes.
So the thing is, I've been I've been an atheist since I was 11.
Right.
And I don't really I guess it depends how you define spiritual.
Oh, it can be defined a million different ways. Like I've had people tell me about like rocks that like they give like gemstones or whatever. Like I'm more curious about like what you define it as. 'Cause it sounds like you really think about it like as relating to God.
Yeah, well, that's the
God.
thing. I don't want it. I don't. So I don't believe in anything that I can't prove the existence of with either my eyes, my ears, my nose, my hands, or mathematics. As long as one of those things can show me that this is true, I'll believe it, right? But if none of those things can show me that it's true, then I'm like, what are you talking to me about, right? Like,
exactly.
But what's enough for me, honestly, like the beauty of the sun rising at dawn, the smell of the ocean, the wind in the forest, that's enough for me.
Yeah.
I like to...
Plenty. That counts as spiritual experience, I think.
If you define it that way, then for sure. Yeah, that's enough for me. I like to, every time I look and I see the sun rising or setting, I think to myself, the whole earth turned around once, and we were propelling in space. I don't remember the number of the speed, the speed that we're propelling at. But we're propelling in space at a very high number, and we're turning in place at a very high number, and the whole planet just turned one way, one turn around, and I saw it happen from the beginning to the end.
So crazy.
And that's enough for me.
Yeah, another thing I would put in that category is like going out, like maybe you're camping, but like away from light pollution, and just looking up at the stars. Yeah. Same kind of thing. You're like, wow, that light is like millions of years old.
Yeah.
Like you're not even seeing the light.
Past.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Straight window to the past.
Yep.
Crazy.
We can see the beginning of the universe. We can look at the Big Bang now.
Yeah. Right.
We've seen the Big Bang.
We saw the first black hole recently, or a picture of it.
We took a picture of it.
Pretty crazy.
That thing's huge.
Crazy shit. Yeah. Like I said, anything counts as spiritual experience, but like I think I get a lot of unique answers to that question, so I like it. And then I have like one final thing. I think everyone has like one song that kind of been playing in their head recently. You have a song that's been like stuck in your head?
Yeah, every August I get Scorpions' "Wind of Change" stuck in my head.
Scorpions' "Wind of Change."
It's there's a verse there. It's about an August summer night, but it's about the Berlin Wall coming down, and it's about they don't bring up the wall specifically, but they talk about a changing world. And I left Iran 7 years ago in July. And I was listening to it when I got on the plane,
nice.
and I moved here to the States. And every summer that song is playing in my head. It's
Oh yeah.
And I like to think that maybe Winds of Change will blow once more, but we'll see.
Yeah, slow going. All right, barring any death cries, I think we're gonna close it here. This has been me. I'm Tyler. This is Adam. This is the second biggest, second best live podcast in the world. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Now we see if it's been working the whole time.
Oh, God.
Let's see. We have one viewer. Looks good.